Hello, today I'd like to read for you the first chapter of Spark by Leanne Winger. Spark, Book 1 of the Reawakening Trilogy by Leanne Winger. Chapter 1. A human is coming. Thea tumbled down the hallway, rebounded off the door frame, and dropped to the ground at Roland's side, quivering with excitement. Roland sat perfectly still, staring at the model ship in his hands. Roland, why'd he have to be in Vidlis right now when there was so much going on? Of course, it was expected that elves of their age would start to slow down and take their place in society, but it was becoming all too clear that Roland was aging faster than she was, despite being 2 circles younger. His rough red granite skin was already quite smooth, compared to Thea's amber diamond skin, and he was becoming far too happy to just sit and stare at something's coming. Roland looked up, his emerald eyes twinkling. A human is coming! The words tumbled out of Thea again. A real human is coming here today. A human? His eyes widened in surprise. How do you know? Someone in the temple heard a message from Kelly, a real vision. A human is coming today on a ship from the Darklands. His name is Davis, and he is a great musician, and Kelly wants him to perform in our theater. I thought all the humans died in the Great War. I guess not, because there's one coming today. You're sure? Grusha heard it at Nikita's, and they heard it from one of the priestesses, so it has to be true. Are you going to come? Well, of course I'll come. Roland glanced down at his work. We have some time, though, right? The transport from Svaki won't be here for another 3 measures. What if he hires a private boat and sails against the tide? Thea sighed. I guess there isn't a huge rush. What are you working on? Studying for the big race. Roland held up the model ship. Is that a model of the Eagle? No, it's the Raven from Rokov. She's our biggest competition. Not that I'd ever admit that to her crew. Roland grinned. But you're going to win the race, right? Of course we are. It doesn't hurt to have some tricks up your sleeve, though. Know your enemy, right? As he turned the model over, his eyes got the distant expression that showed he was using his elf sight again. Every elf developed a special kind of sight as they matured into adulthood. Roland had deep sight, allowing him to see inside or through things if he sat and stared long enough. That was always the key. If you sat and stared long enough. Thea hadn't even figured out what kind of elf sight she had. She gave a little sigh and put her chin in her hands. Roland gave her a keen glance. You don't have to act so exasperated, you know. I wasn't going to be in Vidlis for long. That's what you always say, and the next thing you know, it's been half a day. You always interrupt me before it's been that long. Of course I do. If I didn't, you'd be at it for days on end, just like everyone else. It doesn't seem so long, you know, when you have your elf sight. It's so interesting, it's like no time passes at all. He ran his hand through his brown, moss-like hair. Thea nodded. Yeah, I guess. So are you coming down to the docks with me? I don't want to miss the ship coming in. Okay. Roland set the model down. I'll come. Thea grinned and grabbed Roland's hand. Come on. They ran along the corridor, down the stairs, through the parlor, and out onto the street. There, the sights and sounds of the city flooded their senses. Brightly colored banners fluttered overhead, strung between pure white stone arches. The murmur of crowds drifted by on the cool breeze, with the smell of salts and the cry of the gulls. Children scampered underfoot, tumbling over each other with their rough, boulder-like skin. Mature elves strolled past at a more dignified pace, their stony skin as smooth and polished as their manners. Thea and Roland ducked past them as they raced down the street, turning onto one of the steep alleyways that intersected the large mountainside city. Without a second thought, Thea tucked into a roll and tumbled down at top speed. Her stone-like skin was tough enough to withstand many bumps and bruises, and rough play was encouraged amongst the younger elves. It helped smooth out their rough skin. Thea reached the bottom of the alley, scrambled to her feet, and kept running. She laughed with delight when she saw that Roland was keeping up without any trouble. He wasn't getting too old and boring yet. They cut through the back of a large textile market, down another alley, and into the harbor district. News traveled fast in the elvish capital city of Liadmyla. The streets around the docks were packed with others who had heard the news and were eager to catch a glimpse of the human when he arrived. 1,000 variations of stone-like skin gleamed throughout the milling throng. Light glimmered in a multitude of gemstone eyes. "I told you we should have come sooner," Thea glared at Roland as they struggled to make headway through the jostling crowds. Roland looked around. "Just a moment." "What? Wait here, I'll be right back." Roland disappeared into an alley. Thea did her best to hold her place in the milling throng. Shopkeepers called their wares, buskers performed, taking full advantage of the crowd. The savory smells of street food drifted on the sea breeze. With the hum of excitement all around her, it almost felt like a festival day. "Come on!" Roland beckoned her towards the alley. Thea shoved and elbowed her way towards him. The alleyway was deserted. Leaving the crowds behind, Thea followed Roland down the narrow passageway, over a fence, and down the alley on the other side. Turning a corner, they found the next street to be just as crowded as the last one had been. Dodging their way through the crowds, they crossed the street to the alleyway on the other side. It was a dead end. Roland gestured to a fire escape ladder, suspended above their heads. "Are you sure?" Thea began. "Well, do you want a good view or not?" Roland grinned. "Here, I'll boost you up." Stepping onto Roland's interlocked hands, Thea was just able to reach the bottom rung of the ladder. She pulled herself up and clambered to the top, stepping up onto the roof of the building. An expanse of rooftops and chimneys stretched out before her like an unfamiliar world. Roland stepped beside Thea and gave her a sidelong glance. "What? Haven't you been up here before?" Thea shook her head. "I never would have thought." Movement on the horizon caught her eye. "Is that the transport?" Roland frowned. "It's early." "Come on!" Thea started to run, but was soon stopped short by the rambling rooftop maze. Roland led her around chimneys, across narrow planks spanning the gaps between buildings, and skirting the occasional rooftop garden. "I come up here with the team every now and then," Roland explained. "It's a great spot for fitness training." He thought for a moment and grinned. "And for getting to the docks without being noticed." Soon they made it to the row of buildings that bordered the harbor. Roland got down on his knees and peered over the edge to the gangways below. Thea knelt beside him to look. 2 stories below them, the streets were even more crowded than before. Roland gestured to a second-story balcony a short distance away. "Want a front row seat?" "Yes, but come on then." Roland gestured for her to follow. Thea caught up as he crouched on the roof, directly above the balcony. It was tastefully decorated with bronze latticework chairs, an etched glass table, and a flowering vine trailing up the wall. With a careful leap, Roland vaulted down and held up a hand for Thea. Thea rolled her eyes and jumped down after him. "Excuse me?" Thea turned to see a stern-faced elf emerge from the doorway behind her. The smooth surface of her quartz-like skin showed her to be older than Thea, though not as old as Thea's parents. Her hair was mossy and thick, like every elf's was, but hers was decorated with a small string of pearls. Thea gave a nod of respect. "Hello. I'm sorry for our unexpected presence. We were just looking for a place to watch the human's arrival. Have you heard?" The elf snorted. "That is all anyone is talking about, believe me. But I'm afraid that this is a private balcony. How did you get up here?" "Never mind." Roland stepped beside Thea and took her arm. "We can find another place to watch, can't we, Thea?" Thea gave Roland a sidelong glance as he ushered her towards the edge of the balcony. "Thea Kirasink?" Thea glanced back. "Yes, that's my name." The expression on the elf's face shifted. "You are Fonya and Tasia's child, of course. I was at a function with your mother once, the society gala at the Palace Gardens. Tell me, how is she doing?" "Oh, she's doing well, thank you." A fond smile spread across the elf's face. "I remember she was wearing a beautiful green dress with pearls. Such a high society lady. I heard she married up from second house, though I never would have guessed it by watching her. So high class. That was my very first gala, you know. Though I may say we are well off for being second house. You should see the nice sitting room we have downstairs. My husband married up from third house, and he put on airs for I don't know how long. Not that I begrudged him that, of course." She turned back towards the door. Ilya, we have guests. Bring out some refreshments." Gesturing Thea and Roland towards the chairs, their hostess smiled amiably. What good fortune this is such a beautiful day. Thea, I must say, you look a lot like your uncle. Diamond skin too, although his is pure diamond, as they say. But you have the same copper tint to your hair. I absolutely adore it. You will have a seat, won't you? Good. My, there are a lot of people about today. I don't know if I've ever seen so many down at the harbor. Except when there is an event, of course. Ilya! Oh, there you are. A sandstone-skinned elf with a friendly face emerged from the door, carrying a serving tray and a large pitcher. He set them on the table and nodded greetings to Thea and Roland. This is Thea Kirasink. The first elf beamed as she made her introductions. She just dropped by to watch the transport come in. This is my husband Ilya, and I'm Ksenia. Do make yourself comfortable. I'll just go grab a few things and be right back. Ilya, we'll keep you company, won't you, dear? Good. Well, I'll be right back then. Help yourself to the things Ilya brought out, and if there's anything I can get for you, do let me know. I would be happy to oblige. Right, the glasses. I will only be a moment. Thea glanced at Roland as Ksenia disappeared through the doorway. He eyed the view of the harbor in a casual way, but the tension in his shoulders showed his discomfort. Thea turned to Ilya. Thank you for your hospitality. Ilya smiled. It's no trouble. Do you come to the harbor often? Thea nodded. I do sometimes, but Roland comes almost every day. He sails on the Eagle. Ilya looked at Roland. The Eagle, eh? So your first house too? Roland nodded. I hear you're favored to win the race coming up. Roland shrugged. We'll see. Ilya smiled amiably, but didn't seem to find anything else to say. Thea turned her attention to the refreshments on the table. The serving tray held an assortment of crackers, cheeses, and fruits. The pitcher held some sort of sweet-smelling beverage. Small drops of condensation glistened on its sides. Ksenia soon returned with some glasses and small plates. With a stream of endless chatter, she urged them to partake, and continued the one-sided conversation as they did so. The sound of a clanging bell drifted by on the ocean breeze, the signal that a large ship was entering the harbor. Thea tried not to be impolite, but she couldn't help straining her eyes to see the transport appear from behind the lighthouse that marked the entrance of the harbor. It was coming. It was really coming. A whole measure early, Roland muttered. That never happens. As the transport grew closer, Thea could see members of the crew at work on the deck, preparing for their arrival. The Osprey, or the transport, as it was often called, was the only vessel to make regular trips between the elvish island of Larcia and the Darklands. Thea had never been to the Darklands. Very few elves she knew had, but a small community of elves lived there, in the fortress town of Svokji. The transport ferried resources back and forth, and the occasional passenger, though those were rare, and had certainly never been a human. Thea had heard about humans. They fought alongside the elves in the Great War. Not that Thea knew much about the Great War. It had happened over 1,000 circles ago, long before she was born. Of course, there were many elves who had been alive at that time, but they were all old and slow now. Thea hadn't ever spoken to any of them. Apparently there were other races that used to live out there, across the sea, but most of them had died in the war. As far as anyone knew, Svokji was the last fortress of civilization, on a continent ravaged by dragons and infested with goblins and other monsters. But now, a human was coming. The murmur of the crowds grew in anticipation as the Osprey's crew eased her up to the dock and threw across the heaving lines. Thea leaned over the edge of the balcony. Where was the human? There was a stir on the deck of the Osprey as a cluster of people emerged from the captain's quarters. Thea recognized the captain and several senior members of the crew that she'd met at Roland's house. There, who is that? Another figure was just visible behind the first mate. The captain stepped up to the top of the gangplank, his voice ringing out above the crowds. Well, what a fine reception! I haven't docked to a crowd like this since my racing days. There were cheers from the crowd. I suppose you've all heard I have a special cargo today. I never knew hazelnuts were so popular. Laughter rang around the crowded dockyard. Well, where is he? Someone yelled. The captain feigned surprise. Who? I don't suppose you could mean this ragamuffin I picked up in Svokji. He stepped aside, and Thea caught her first real view of the human. He was shorter than the average elf, but otherwise seemed quite similar in form and figure. His dark, smooth hair was swept back from a face that bore a keen, eager expression, and his sandy brown skin appeared strangely soft as he waved his greetings. The crowd enjoyed the captain's joke immensely. Cheers and laughter echoed across the harbor. "I hear there's a big to-do up at the theatre today," the captain roared over the noise. "So off you go now. Make way for the human. Don't trample him now." The crowds parted to make way for the human as he stepped down the gangplank. A messenger from the royal house stepped forward to meet him, and after a couple of quiet words, they set off down the street. The crowd closed in around them, making it almost impossible to see, but Thea caught an occasional glimpse of the human, his strange, smooth hair, so unlike the mossy hair of the elves. A beaming smile turned upwards to take in all the sights and the crowds jostling him on every side. A lute hung over his back, but he didn't appear to be carrying much else. His clothes were plain and serviceable, and certainly a different fashion than what was typical amongst the elves, but they seemed to suit him well. Following the messenger from the royal house, he made his way down the busy street, and the crowd surged after him. "So," the captain bellowed, "what's an elf got to do to get some help around here?" The transport's crews sprang into action and started unloading their cargo as the docks returned to the usual busy clatter. Thea looked around eagerly, but there was no way down from the balcony without going through the house or climbing back onto the roof. She turned to their hosts. "Thank you for letting us stay and watch." "It was no trouble at all," Ksenia smiled. "It's a nice little balcony for watching the harbor, if I do say so myself. What an interesting fellow that human was. He looked so soft and squishy, and no fashion sense at all. I wonder why so many people were interested in seeing him. The novelty, I suppose. You don't see a human every day. I wonder how long he will be staying." "I'm not sure," Thea ventured, "but we were hoping to go up to the theater, so we should probably—" "Oh, yes, that's where everyone is heading. It should be quite interesting, don't you think? I would go myself if it wasn't such a long walk." Thea nodded. "It was very nice to meet you." "And likewise, my dear. Do say hello to your mother for me. Ksenia de Malatusk. Do you think you'll remember the name? She might not remember me, but it was at the society gala at the palace gardens, and I was wearing a cute little hat with red flowers. She might remember that. I was sitting near the back by the windows." "I will be sure to tell her." "And if you ever have a chance to mention our names to your uncle, we'd be ever so grateful. It never hurt anyone having friends in high places." She gave a little laugh. "High places, and high on the mountain, too. That's a favorite little joke of mine. Isn't the view up there divine? I must say that Liadmila is the most beautiful city on all Larsia. It's certainly prettier than dirty little Rokov, and most of the other towns are so small they can hardly count." Thea gave an apologetic smile. "I really think we should be—" "You should be going, of course. I'm sure there will be quite the rush to get seats at the theater today. But look at this tray. You barely ate anything." "I don't think—" "I know. We'll send you along with some odds and ends that you can enjoy at the theater." "Thank you, but we really don't—" Ksenia turned and gestured them through the door. "Oh, it will only take a moment. You just enjoy a word or two with Ilya while I pop into the kitchen." Thea looked at Roland in consternation, but she couldn't see any way around it. They had to wait to be polite. As Ksenia disappeared into the kitchen, Roland shifted uncomfortably. It's a nice house," he ventured. "Very decorated." "Ksenia's done a lot with it," Ilya replied. "She likes that sort of thing." Silence descended again. "Should be good weather for the race," Ilya offered. Roland nodded. "Should be." Outside, the sounds of the crowd faded away. Thea glanced towards the door. "Are you going to watch the race?" Roland asked when the silence had stretched on far too long. "I think I'll be working. I used to watch, though." Thea fidgeted. She'd heard so many stories about humans. Now was her chance to see one for herself, but he was getting further and further away. Ksenia finally reappeared, bearing a neatly wrapped parcel. Her farewell pleasantries were painfully long, but Thea managed to keep a cheerful face until she and Roland stepped out the front door and heard it close behind them. Then they ran up the street as fast as their legs could carry them. "Why did you let her keep talking?" Roland demanded as they rounded the first corner. "I was trying to be polite," Thea gasped. The well-worn road rose higher up the mountainside city with every turn. They were very nice. Roland stopped to catch his breath. Nice? To let us use their balcony. Roland gave her a strange look. She only let us stay once she found out who you were. Being related to the most important people in First House will do that for you. What? Just because my uncle is Chancellor doesn't mean I'm anyone special. Roland snorted. Try being a nobody and see how nice everyone is to you then. He shook his head. Dirty Rokov. They started running again and made it past the aqueducts before stopping again to catch their breath. Thea leaned against a wall, panting heavily. Almost there. Roland collapsed on a roadside bench with a groan. I'm going to feel that tomorrow. Thea stretched her aching legs. Been a while since you ran the full height of Leidmile. Roland made a face. Come on, we can rest once we're at the theater. Thea pushed herself up. Roland didn't move. Come on. I don't... Roland looked down. You know my family doesn't have a box at the theater. I don't think I'll be able to get in. Thea frowned. You can sit in my family's box. You always have. A strange look passed Roland's face. I didn't want to presume. Of course you can sit with us. Now come on, I don't want to miss it. Turning, Thea hurried on. Thankfully, Roland followed her this time. They crested the last steep stretch of road at an easy jog, rounded the corner, and stepped into the courtyard of the theater. It was a beautiful building. Not as impressive as in Kelly's temple, of course, but easily among the 5 most ornate buildings in the city. Its large domed roof gleamed with gold. Stone carvings adorned its smooth marble walls. The gilded front doors stretched nearly 2 stories high and were set with precious stones of all colors. Outside the doors, a throng of elves had gathered, pushing and jostling. An official stood outside, encouraging the crowd through in an orderly manner. From the number of people waiting, it was clear that Roland was right. If they didn't have a box, there was no way they would have made it in. Bypassing the crowds, Thea and Roland circled to a second set of doors nearby, equally as ornate, though not as large. An attendant opened the door for them and escorted them up to the balcony where the private boxes were. Often, when Thea decided to go to the theater, she and Roland were the only ones in her family's box. Today, she was surprised to find her uncle and both of her parents already seated and waiting for the performance to begin. They greeted Thea and Roland with polite nods before turning their attention back to their own conversation. Thea looked around. It was rare to see the theater this full. Every box was lined with faces. Even the Queen Regent was present, seated with a crowd of nobles in the royal box. The seats far below looked equally packed. Polite murmuring filled the air, along with the muted rustle of velvet and silk. A different audience than the raucous crowds at the docks, but just as curious. A herald stepped onto the stage, draped in robes of gold and purple. Across the theater, a hushed silence descended. Lords and ladies, people of Leidmile, we have today a most distinguished visitor. The great Kelly has sent to us from across the sea a human, a musician of highest excellence, servant of the ancient wisdom, sworn in the service of Alulian, and he has come to perform in our theater today. Lords and ladies, Queen Regent, I present to you our illustrious guest, Davis. The human stepped onto the stage. Smiling, he spread his arms wide in greeting. He wore the same simple traveling clothes that Thea had seen earlier, and the lute still hung over his back. Lifting his hands, he looked toward the domed ceiling high above him and began to speak. The words were strange. Thea frowned. Did the human not know Elvish? Her heart sank. It would still be interesting to listen to him, of course, but she had been hoping to at least understand what he was saying. She hadn't stopped to consider that humans might have a different language. A small gasp spread through the audience, starting with those seated closest to the stage, spreading outwards like a ripple. The wave grew closer and engulfed Thea with a warm, tingling feeling. Her ears rang, and suddenly she understood the words that were being spoken. And I praise you, O ancient wisdom, for opening the ears of all those who are here, that they may hear your song that I will sing today. May your glory and power be known throughout all Raftova, even as it is here today. Thea glanced at Roland. His eyes were wide with surprise. All around her, mouths were open in astonishment. In the temple box, the priests of Enkeli stared at the human with expressions of shock and incredulity. That was magic. Real magic. Davis smiled and bowed, ever so slightly. Hello, everyone. I'm Davis. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. 1 year ago, I published my book Spark, and I thought this would be a really fun way to celebrate that anniversary. If you're interested in reading the book for yourself, you can find it on my website, leannewinger.com, or just give it a Google to find it other places where you can buy it on the internet. And I'll see you again soon. Bye! Let's check on that. Okay. Yes. 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 All right. Dang it. In our theater. Yeah. We might as well just start again.